September 15th, 1986. A rainy night in Hwasong, Gyeonggi Province. This area had always been a peaceful countryside where narrow dirt roads wound through vast rice fields. No one could have imagined that, in just one night, an overwhelming fear would descend upon this quiet place. Early the next morning, a farmer went out to his fields as usual. But as he passed through, he stopped. Amidst the tall grass, there was something that didn't belong. He stepped closer, and in that instant, his stomach twisted into a knot. It was a body. The victim was a woman, around 70 years old. She lay in the middle of the field, her clothes disheveled, her neck tightly strangled with her own garments. There were no signs of struggle, no external wounds. No trace of the killer. A murder, disturbingly clean. Police quickly arrived at the scene, but while they were still piecing together what had happened, less than a month later, another body was found. This time, the victim was a young woman, only 25 years old. The method of killing was identical to the first. Clothes torn, neck strangled, signs of assault. 2 cases, 2 victims, 2 different ages, but the same execution. And then came the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th. Hwasong was no longer at peace. A serial killer was on the loose. No one knew who he was. No one had seen him leave the crime scenes, but one thing was certain. He had no intention of stopping. The Hwasong police quickly realized that these were no ordinary murders. The methods were identical. The victims were attacked at night in secluded areas. No signs of struggle, no strange footprints, no witnesses. By the time the 3rd body was found, any doubt about a serial killer had vanished. December 14th, 1986. Another field. Another death. This time, the victim was a 24-year-old woman. She was found in the same condition as the others. Her clothes torn, her neck strangled with her own stocking. No signs of a struggle, no traces of the killer. But there was one strange detail. Near the body, the police found something unusual. A partially smoked cigarette, a seemingly insignificant object, but at that time, it was the only real clue they had. For the first time, they thought they had a chance. If they could find the person who smoked that cigarette, they might be able to track down the monster responsible for these horrifying crimes. But what they didn't know was that the killer was already one step ahead. Weeks later, another body was found. Then another. By now, fear had spread like wildfire. Women no longer dared to walk alone at night. Families locked their doors tightly as soon as the sun set. Police forces were stretched thin, patrolling the town at all hours. But no matter what they did, he disappeared the moment he struck, like a ghost. And the most terrifying thing was, no one knew when or who he would target next. The Hwasong police were facing an unsolvable puzzle. They had 5 victims, all murdered in the same way. They had the same crime scenes, deserted fields, isolated dirt roads, but they had no clear clues to follow, no witnesses, no traces of the killer, no motive. The investigation team was mobilized at full capacity. They combed through the entire area, questioned every resident, inspected every warehouse, every vacant lot. But no matter how hard they searched, they found nothing. At this point, a critical question emerged. Was the killer a local? Because to strike so quickly, to vanish into the darkness without a trace, he had to know the roads, the escape routes. He had to anticipate how the police would react after each crime. But if he lived in this town, then who was he? The police began narrowing down their suspects. They investigated individuals with violent records, men who lived alone, anyone who displayed suspicious behavior. The list grew longer and longer. They interrogated hundreds, took fingerprints, cross-checked every detail with the crime scenes, but nothing matched. And then, while they were still struggling with questions that had no answers, the 6th murder happened. This time, the victim was only 19 years old. She was killed on a road less than 100 meters from her home. Panic set in. The police had deployed hundreds of officers to patrol the area. They had searched every corner of the town. They had done everything they could, but they still couldn't stop him. The killer was playing a game with rules only he understood, and he was winning. The Hwasong police were at a complete standstill. 6 murders, the same method, yet no reliable leads. The killer moved like a ghost, emerging from the darkness, striking with precision and vanishing without a trace. In the days that followed, fear gripped the entire town. Streets were deserted after dark. Women refused to walk alone, and doors were locked tightly before sunset. Police increased patrols, but it all felt meaningless. And then he struck again. May 2nd, 1987. Another victim was found. The method remained unchanged. But this time, the police noticed something unusual. Near the body, they found a broken wristwatch. It could have belonged to the victim, or perhaps to the killer. The watch was sent for analysis. It turned out to be a popular brand at the time, sold widely across South Korea. In other words, it was used as a clue. Once again, the investigation had hit a dead end. But this time, the police refused to stand by and do nothing. They launched the largest manhunt in South Korean history. Over 1,800 officers were mobilized. They screened more than 21,000 men, collected over 40,000 fingerprints, and monitored every suspicious individual, tracking their every move. Yet no matter how hard they tried, the killer remained untouchable. 3 years passed. More murders followed. The deaths continued, and then in 1991, the final recorded case occurred. After that, he vanished. No one knew why. Had he left the town? Had he been arrested for a different crime? Or was he still here, living among the people of Hwasong, blending in as if he were just another ordinary citizen? The case was closed. The serial killer was never caught. The police had no choice but to admit defeat. But what they didn't know was that nearly 30 years later, an unexpected breakthrough was coming. A new technology would change everything, and for the first time in decades, the police would finally see the face of the murderer. Time passed. Everything seemed to fade into oblivion. The victims' families gradually accepted that justice might never come. If the killer was still alive, he could be somewhere out there, continuing his life as if nothing had ever happened. But then, 30 years later, a major breakthrough occurred. In 2019, the South Korean police decided to reopen the Hwasong case. This time, they had a tool that had never existed in the 1980s, modern DNA analysis technology. They recollected DNA samples from old pieces of evidence, skin cells, hair, and biological traces found at the crime scenes. They ran them through the National DNA Database, and for the first time in the case's history, they had a name. Chun-jae, a middle-aged man serving a life sentence for another crime, the rape and murder of his sister-in-law in 1994. When the police confronted Lee, he showed no fear, no denial, no resistance. He simply sat there, calmly looking at the investigators, and then he smiled. Cold, ruthless. And he began to talk. He admitted to everything. He was the one who committed 10 murders in Hwasong from 1986 to 1991. But what was even more horrifying, he had killed 4 more people beyond the officially recorded cases, a total of 14 victims, 14 lives taken. And for more than 30 years, no one knew who he was. With Lee Chun-jae's confession, the Hwasong case was officially closed. But justice was never truly served, because under South Korean law, murder could only be prosecuted within 15 years. By the time Lee's DNA was matched to the crime scenes, the statute of limitations had already expired. That meant he would never stand trial for any of the Hwasong murders. He would remain in prison, but for a different crime. No one could do anything more. No one could change the law to make him pay for the lives he had taken. All they could do was listen in shock and anger as he recounted every detail of his crimes. More than 30 years ago, he was a ghost in the night, spreading fear across Hwasong. 30 years later, when he was finally unmasked, justice had already come too late. That was how the Hwasong case ended, but the memories of it will never fade. The families who lost their loved ones waited decades, only to be met with an empty resolution. The women who once lived in fear of the faceless killer had grown old, but they never forgot the terror that haunted them. The detectives who spent their youth hunting for the murderer could do nothing but watch as he smiled, knowing he would never be punished for what he had done. This case changed everything. It forced South Korean law to extend the statute of limitations for similar crimes. It forced law enforcement to rethink how they investigate serial murders. And it forced society to ask one terrifying question: How many killers are still out there walking free? How many other cases remain unsolved? How many other families are still waiting for justice? The Hwasong case may be over, but the harsh truth is, this won't be the last time the law fails to stop a killer. Thank you for following this story. If you found this case intriguing, hit like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next mystery. And remember, there are still ghosts lurking in the dark.